I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. Did everyone get the recording notification pinged to them? Okay, awesome. Just want to make sure we're recording. Because just so everyone has a heads up, we will be recording tonight's meeting and then sharing it hopefully on YouTube if I can upload the file. But that's the plan for anyone that couldn't make it tonight. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Tiffany. I'm one of the board members at USC HRMA, and the plan is for each of the boards to take a shot at going through the announcements with everyone each month. So I'll be the first one to test drive this out. So just to point out our two QR codes, we do have a sign-in QR code. If anyone that's logged on tonight, whether you're a student, an alumni, or just not affiliated with the school, just attending, please sign in. This just helps us track how many attendees we had for each event. So for our records, please go ahead and sign in. It's a quick form. It will take you just a few seconds. And then on the right side, we have our QR code for the newsletter and becoming a member. We have a statement of intent form. It just takes, I'd say, a little bit longer than the other form to fill out. If you do want to get emails from us somewhat regularly and be posted up when our meetings happen, that's a great way to sign up and for us to have your records as well. But yeah, feel free to scan either of those. If you need them after the meeting, I'll probably likely send these out to everyone that attended today as well through hyperlink too. But just if you want to get the ball rolling while we wait, that's cool too. Now moving on to the announcements that we have lined up. I wanted to share, PIRA is one of the organizations that is for professionals in HR that our group is affiliated with. So I did want to spotlight for any of our members that are local to SoCal. In Long Beach, PIRA is hosting a social event coming up next week, next Tuesday, 5:30 to 8 p.m. It will be at a nice restaurant, so please feel free to scan their QR code if you would like to register. I believe it's $10 for PIRA members. Typically for students, and being part of USC HRMA, you do get the student rate. So it should be cheaper than $10. I believe students usually come in for like $5 or so. If not, shouldn't be too expensive, but it's a great place to network and meet with other HR professionals and just kind of get out of the house post-COVID. So I'm planning on attending, so definitely hope to see some familiar faces there too. And then next up, we just got notified from CalSHRM, which is one other, SHRM is the larger group we are affiliated with, and CalSHRM is just the California division of SHRM. There is going to be a student event coming up on Saturday, the 5th of November in the morning. It'll be a coffee talk chat where we'll be learning about megatrends and charting out our careers. So if you just want to come to network, hear from the guest speaker, and they'll also be providing information. This is like the scoop or the sneak peek on info at the student case competition next year. So definitely please feel free to attend. SHRM also wants us to know that they'll be sponsoring some prizes. So oftentimes they'll give out gift cards to anyone that answers questions and pays attention. So if you love free stuff, definitely attend. This QR code is the Zoom link for that. But again, I'll also be distributing it as well after tonight in case you want the link bookmarked somewhere. And then next, we also want to highlight our speaker series event coming up next month. So we'll be meeting again next month on the 7th at 6 p.m. same time, Zoom link to come. And we'll be hearing from Professor Ho on belonging and inclusion. So definitely recommend you make it to check it out. Great lecture coming up.
I'm the opening act for Dr. Ho.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate that.
I think it's glitching. Let me see what's up. There we go. And then that missed one. There we go. And then just wanted to encourage everyone to go ahead and follow us on social media. If emails aren't your thing, they're not my thing. Definitely keep tabs on us on LinkedIn. You can just put in the search bar HRMA USC as one word, and our board page should come up where we post social media announcements like meetings tonight. And then you could also follow us on Instagram, same at HRMA USC, to get updates on when our next events will be and any updates on links and stuff like that. And then we also really quickly just wanted to take a quick photo. This meeting is being recorded, but I figure take a nice screenshot. If you are comfortable, please feel free to come on camera. We will be sharing this on our LinkedIn and our Instagram for a quick photo. Chelsea, do you mind screenshotting the everyone for us?
Give me 1 second. I don't want to mess this up. Okay. Okay. Smile. Okay. I think I got it.
Awesome. Cool. And then awesome. So yeah, we wanted to welcome tonight's guest speaker. We have Professor Johnson, and then we've also included his bio. We've shared this pretty widely, I think, on social media, so I won't bore you by reading it. But definitely, you've definitely seen it if you've been one of his students or if you've been following us along on social media to have the bio that we've shared. But yeah, so I definitely want to stop sharing and hand this off. Let's see. There we go. And then Professor Johnson, you should be able to share now. Let me know if you have any issues with that.
Okay, let me see if I can do that. All right, can everybody see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Am I on? Am I ready to go? All right, cool. We're going to skip the self-introductions in the interest of time, so that's one thing on the slide that we'll forget about. But welcome, first of all. Happy to be here. And the intent here is to give you some tips with respect to not only job search in general, but in particular for those of you who are pursuing your master's in HRM, which is why you're in this program, but are not yet working in HR. How do I break in? So it's not an easy process, and so I'm going to give you some kind of general suggestions and tips, and then some very specific ones for those of you who are not working in HR but are aspiring to be working in HR, and some things that you can do. So that's why we're here. So starting with respect to just kind of teeing up some where I'm going with this. What do I want to do in HR? Do you want to be a generalist? Do you want to be a specialist? Do you want to be in a big company? Do you want to be in a small company? Do you have any idea what industry you want to be in? There's no right answer for any of those questions. It just depends on you and what you want to do. But it does help to target that and to kind of narrow the focus. There's a line from Alice in Wonderland that if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, which is a true statement. So to the extent that you have some specific ideas about the kind of company you want to work in, or the kind of industry that you want to work in, or the kind of role that you want to work in, to the extent that you know that in advance, it helps to kind of narrow the focus and move things along. Where do you want to be? Just geography matter? Do you need to stay where you are now? Are you mobile? In the local area, within the state, within the region, within the country. That opens up a whole host of opportunities that you might not have otherwise considered. And I already touched on big company versus small company, and there are some huge differences, which I'll touch on in a minute. I'm going to talk very, very briefly about tools, specifically your resume, which is kind of a no-brainer, a target list, which we'll talk about in a minute, your elevator pitch, and I'll explain that in just a second, and then specifically LinkedIn. And we could spend 2-3 hours just on LinkedIn, but I'm just going to give you a 30,000-foot flyover. With respect to the job search process generally, there's no one single right way to land a role. You need to be using all the arrows in your quiver. So you should be using search firms, you should be looking at job boards, you should be networking, and in particular, you should be networking. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Okay. And the process is, again, going from the large funnel, trying to focus in, trying to narrow in, down to companies, down to specific roles, and then using some of these other tools, not the least of which is networking, to come in not only the front door, but the side door and the back door in every way you can to kind of get in front of the hiring manager. Okay. So as I already touched on, this is 10 pounds of you-know-what in a 5-pound bag. So we're going to move really, really quickly. If you've got a burning question, stop me. My contact information is in here. It's on the next slide, which I'll tee up just to show you that it's there. If I can get there it is down here at the bottom. So if you've got something that we don't have time for, you want to reach out separately, I'd be happy to entertain those questions. Okay. I'm going to skip over the introduction. All right. So to the extent that you can, defining the bullseye is a really important first step. Okay. So as you think about what you want to do, and even if you're in HR, for that matter, if you want to do something perhaps different, if you're in talent acquisition, you want to move into employee relations, you're a comp specialist, you want to move into a HRBP generalist role, whatever that is, define what that bullseye looks like for you. Okay. So think about the role, think about the tasks, think about the responsibilities, think about the environment, think about the management style, think about the culture. There's 100 other variables. And how does that fit into your longer term plan? If you're very early in your career, you're just a year or two out of college and you're still kind of at the entry level, that's fine. And you don't need to have a specific goal that 10 years out, I want to be a director or VP, or I want to be a generalist, I want to be a specialist. But to the extent that you do, it's then easier to create the glide path that how do I go from step A to step B to step C to step D? Okay. So this is all, like I said, individualized, specific to what you want to do. But if you have a plan, if you aspire to be a CHRO for a big company 10 or 15 years from now, then you've got to have a plan with respect to, all right, what are the skills I'm going to need to be successful at that role, and where am I going to get them? And how am I going to move from specialist role to specialist role, or very within generalist roles and so forth, to get to where I want to be, wherever that is. Okay. Most HR roles, entry-level HR roles, are non-exempt. All of you know what that is, which I think is a bit of a shame. Several years ago, there seemed to be a better supply-demand balance with respect to entry-level exempt positions. So what now would be called an HR rep or an HR business partner or a generalist, particularly in small companies, seem to be more plentiful than they are now. And an awful lot of HR roles start as non-exempt. No harm, no foul. It just, you're starting from a little bit of a handicap in a non-exempt role sometimes, particularly if you're in a coordinator role or an HR assistant role. But, you start where you are. You grow where you're planted. So it doesn't matter a heck of a lot whether you're exempt or non-exempt. Another significant issue is deciding whether you want to move in a generalist role and you stay in a specialist role. So the specialist roles can be individual contributor roles, they can be manager, director, even VP roles in large companies. So if talent acquisition is your thing, or compensation, total rewards is your thing, there are certainly avenues to get there. But the further you progress through your career, those lanes diverge somewhat. So if you want to be a generalist, starting as an HR business partner or something of that sort, and then going from small company to medium-sized company to larger company and so forth, including union and non-union and employee relations and all the other kind of stuff. But if you aspire to be an executive level, a CHRO, VP of HR, you really have to know the whole set of skills. You got to know employee relations, you got to know legal and compliance, you got to know total rewards, and a bunch of other stuff that we don't frankly cover in the Bovard curriculum at the CHRO level, like working with boards, for example, which is not really covered in our coursework, but we'll get there. A big company, small company. The advantage of working in a big company, particularly if it's a mature, well-established, more sophisticated company, a Boeing or a GE or a Google even. Generally speaking, they've already figured it out, including in Amazon and others. So the advantage of a big company is you get an opportunity to see how it's supposed to be done. And I say that kind of advisedly because some are much more sophisticated than others. And it certainly isn't linear with respect to size. There's some big companies doing some really stupid stuff. And there's some small kind of upstart companies that are doing some pretty sophisticated kind of stuff. But generally speaking, in a big role, the advantage is you get an awful lot of infrastructure around you, HRIS and other kinds of things. You also tend to have much more experienced practitioners around you with deeper and broader experience, particularly in the specialty areas like compensation or like learning and development, for example. Okay. Now, conversely, in a small company, my first HR job was in a manufacturing division, Western Gear, now owned by another company, but it was a manufacturing site, and we were an HR department of 3. So there was the HR manager, there was me, and there was an assistant. The plus is you get to experience an awful lot of things. not very deeply necessarily, but you get exposed to all of it. You get exposed to recruiting, you get exposed to employee relations, you get exposed to comp and benefits and all that kind of stuff. So the advantage of starting with a small company is the breadth of coverage. It may be a mile wide, but only an inch deep, but at least you get the breadth of coverage. In a larger company, more often you're going to start as a specialist in some kind of functional role. So you're going to be a comp analyst, or you're going to be a sourcer, or you're going to be an employee relations specialist in kind of a narrow role. Again, not good, not bad, not better, not worse. It just depends on what you want to do and what your longer term goals are and what's the best path to get you there. Okay. But with respect to the extent to which you have a clearer long-term vision, it certainly helps you navigate between here and there with respect to what kind of skills do I want and so forth, what kind of industry. Also, one other real quick point. Some industries are pretty responsive, not responsive, that's the wrong word, are pretty receptive and pretty open to people with a lot of different kinds of backgrounds. Other industries tend to get extraordinarily parochial and narrow in their view with respect to industry background. Case in point, in the life sciences realm generally, which includes not only healthcare, but pharma, med device, lab services and so forth. So in that broad kind of healthcare arena, that's representative of an industry that is incredibly parochial. So if you're 10 years into your career and all of your experiences in manufacturing or in retail, it's really hard to break into the healthcare space because those folks have in my view, wrong idea that, well, gee, if you haven't worked for some significant time in healthcare, you couldn't possibly understand it, which is kind of nonsense, but it's there. So I'm just, the reason I mention that, if healthcare or life sciences is one of the areas that you're interested in, get in as early as you can. It's much easier coming out of healthcare into manufacturing or into retail or professional services or some other functional realm than it is going into healthcare mid-career. So that's a decision you'd want to make earlier rather than later if you can. Okay. Now, still with respect to defining the bullseye, this is a little 2x2 grid that you can see, and I recommend spending some time with this. Now, the more time, the more effort you spend in this, the better off you'll be. The good news is you can pick it up and put it down, pick it up and put it down, pick it up and put it down. So you can spend 5 or 10 minutes on it and then put it down and then come back to it a day later, a week later, and kind of pick up where you left off. And the idea is that think about specific tasks. Think about attributes in the job that you're in. Think about jobs that you really liked. Think about jobs that you were really challenged by. Think about, on the other side, think about places that you didn't like, the work was boring or unchallenging, or you had a jerk for a boss, okay? And populate those 4 cells, okay, with respect to what attribute or skill or task or characteristic fits in one of those 4 squares, okay? And you will find that there are some things that you like doing that you're not necessarily very good at. Conversely, you will find some things that you're good at, but you don't like doing, okay? So in that case, it's going to be in that lower left quadrant. The purpose here is to maximize to the extent that you can those things that are in that top left quadrant, those things that you not only like doing, you enjoy doing, but you're good at, okay? So to the extent that you can identify what that is. So what's the center of the bullseye look like for you? What are those things that you really like doing and that you're really good at, okay? And that will help define then what's the appropriate role for you. What's the role that has the maximum number of those attributes present? You're not going to find one that's going to be 100 out of 100, tell you in advance. There's always some little thing that, well, it's a great job, but it's a 40-mile commute, or it's 70 hours a week, or some other aspect of it. But again, this is a process of focus. This is a process of determining what the bullseye looks for you. Okay, so there's a in TQM, there's a saying that suddenly just went out of my brain, but go fast or go slow. That's what it is. I'm sorry, I said it backwards. Go slow to go fast. So going slow is all this preparatory work, all this thinking and heavy lifting that you need to do with respect to what do I want to do? What do I want to be when I grow up? What does that look like for me? Okay. And determining what that looks like, and to the extent that you're successful in doing that, you've got a much greater chance of not only achieving it, but achieving it in a shorter time frame. Okay. All right. So coming back, still talking about targeting defining the bullseye. So industry, I just touched on that parochial aspect of some of them. Some of them are also pretty incestuous, meaning that they only hire people from competitors or from those industry, which is kind of another way of saying parochial in a fashion. Company reputation. There's one of the things I learned in grad school many years ago, that to the extent that you can, and this is not too much in your control, to the extent that you can start your career or early on in your career, work for one of the marquee companies in HR. So I mentioned like PepsiCo, GE, Allied Signal. Historically, those were kind of role models for best practice within HR. Nowadays, you got Google and some others that, I should probably update my list a little bit. But the point is that to the extent that you can get experience in one of those companies that is known for HR work, not only are you going to learn a lot more, and you're going to see the role models and the action of the companies, how and why they work better, but it's also the kind of thing that stays on your resume and makes you stick out. So just like going to work for McKinsey, as a consultant, especially if it's combined with a well-known school with a degree, and to the extent that you can have that on your resume, it's a reputation builder that stays with you, and well more than it probably worth, but that's the case in point. With respect to location, and more specifically with respect to mobility. So some of these organizations, these large ones like PepsiCo and like GE and Allied Signal and so forth, to move into the bigger chairs, the director roles and the regional VP roles or the corporate roles, in a lot of cases, you need to be mobile. So to what extent does that fold into your criteria set? So if you're married and have small children, that may be more difficult. If you're single or you're childless, that may be more doable depending upon your personal situation. But with a lot of those companies to move up, especially when they're very large global companies distributed not only across the country, but in many cases across the planet, to get some of those experiences, particularly the expat or international experiences, you have to be willing and able to move. So consider that, and to what extent that goes into your calculus. Company culture is a huge one. Why work for a crappy employer? So to the extent that you can identify cultures, positive cultures, and certainly there are places like Glassdoor is a good reference. There are great places to work that Forbes and Fortune magazine put out and so forth. So there are lots of ways that you can kind of triangulate, aside from kind of general reputation within the local area. You can do some research with respect to what those cultures are. I would argue, this is just my personal opinion, that culture trumps an awful lot of those other things. Working in a very positive culture makes work a lot more fun than a company that might be a go-go company, might be really profitable, might be a marquee name, but if the culture is a dog-eat-dog, 80 hours a week and so forth, that gets really old really quickly. So look at that, consider that. And the last thing, and it's bolded for a good reason, to the extent that you can, and this is one of the harder aspects to control, to the extent that you can find a great HR boss, particularly early in your career, somebody who's willing to invest in you, somebody who's willing to be a coach and a mentor, can make a huge difference. I was very fortunate to have a couple of really terrific mentors in my career. First, before I got into HR, spent some time in manufacturing, and then later, when I completed my MBA, went into HR. And my very first HR boss was a terrific mentor, taught me an enormous amount, and made the job a lot of fun. So that, I would suggest, trumps all the other kinds of things. So even if it's a small company and not one of the better known ones, to the extent that you've got a great boss and somebody who's willing to spend time up with you, it really does a lot to kind of jumpstart your career and kind of get you on the right path. Okay. with respect to companies, so you decided what industry, you decided what geography, you're doing a national search, you're doing a local search, wherever it is. There are a number of ways to find out, aside from what you just see on the job boards, for you to be much more proactive instead of reactive in the search. So start with creating a target list of companies. And by the way, this target list, which might have 20 or 30 or 40 companies, will change over time as you do research. So you will discover companies that you didn't know about that you're going to add to your list. You're going to take companies off your list when you discover that, well, geez, I look a little bit deeper into the company. It's not the kind of culture that I was hoping for, or it's one that's going to require me to do too many relocations to advance my career, and that just isn't compatible with my personal situation. But start with the Encyclopedia of Associations. It is an enormously robust relational database that has information about companies, public and private, across the US, hundreds of thousands of them. Like I said, it's just extraordinary. The database itself is expensive, and so it may or may not be available at your local public library. To the extent that I'm sure that SC has it, I'd say that I'm confident, I should say, that SC has it, although I haven't checked that out. For those of you who are in Southern California here, if your local library doesn't have it, or you can't access it through the USC portal, the Newport Beach Public Library, which is in Newport Beach, right adjacent to Fashion Island Shopping Center, for those of you locals, you can get a library card from the Newport Beach Public Library. You don't even have to be a resident of Orange County, much less Newport Beach. The library card is free. And then with a library card, you can log on to their portal through the Newport Beach Public Library portal and access Reference USA. So it's an extraordinary valuable resource as you're researching companies. Okay. Reference USA, sorry. The Encyclopedia of Associations is just what it sounds like. It's another list, extraordinarily exhaustive, but in this case, it's not companies, it's organizations. So it's professional organizations, it's trade organizations, it's industry organizations, it's SIGs, special interest groups, it's fraternal organizations, social organizations. So everything from the Lions Club and Knights of Kiwanis and so forth to the Southern California Society of Green-Eyed Left-Handed Petunia Growers. You name it, it's in there. The reason I mention this, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, to the extent that there's an industry that you want, or you want the HR folks within that industry. So you want to talk with HR folks that work in law firms or HR folks in healthcare. You can find them, those organizations, through the Encyclopedia of Associations. You can also find them through, and it's 3-4 steps down, through LinkedIn groups. Okay. The book of lists are several. I think this is unique to Southern California, but I don't know. There's one for LA, there's one for Orange County, there's one for Ventura County. It's published by the Business Journal. The book is just what it sounds like. It's the 50 largest law firms, the 50 largest hotels, the 50 largest employers, the 50 biggest banks, blah, 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 blah. There's probably 100 or more lists, okay? So to the extent that you wanted to zero in on hotels, for example, you could find out, well, who are the 50 largest hotels in Orange County or in LA County or in Ventura County or whatever. So again, this is another way that you can develop your target list. Glassdoor is another online resource that's available to you that helps you not so much identify companies, but find out more about them. And in particular, what their employment culture is like. So I've sometimes described Glassdoor as kind of Yelp for employers. So you can get an idea what kinds of cultures. You can also get data in there around interviews and pay, et cetera, although it's very anecdotal, so I wouldn't put too much credence in it. And then the last one on the list here, these aren't in any particular preference, best places to work. So Forbes publishes one, Fortune publishes one, some local organizations have one. So there are lots and lots of references that you can look at in terms of, okay, in my geography, within my target industries, who are the companies that ought to be on my radar? Okay, so this is a way to identify that gross list, which we're going to need to pare it down. Okay. So you've identified your list, and one of the ways to find out about roles in those companies, aside from passively waiting to see, well, are there something that pops up on Indeed or Simply Hired or Monster, any number of the job boards, okay, is networking. So I mentioned right at the outset, you should use all the tools at your disposal. So you should use recruiters, both retained search recruiters as well as contingency recruiters. You should be using faculty. You should be using the SC Alumni Association. You should be looking at ads on the job boards. But the place where you will get the most traction and the most value, both short-term and long-term, is in networking. So as you're thinking about your job search process, that's where you want to be spending the time. More time than proportionally than all those other kinds of things. Okay. And an awful lot of jobs, and most jobs, depending upon whose data you read, never get listed. So they never get posted on a job board someplace. It might get posted internally within a company, but even within a company, even large companies sometimes don't post all their positions. So to the extent that you can make entree into a company that's in your target list and you're interested in, you may discover positions, or in some cases, they may even fashion a position just for you if you're impressive enough. So another reason why networking is so important. Now, with respect to tools for networking, business cards, you can get them done really inexpensively at Staples or Office Depot. There's also Vistaprint, which is an online resource. There are templates that exist. You can freeform your own. Just make certain that it has your name and your email address and your phone number at an absolute minimum. Obviously, you can put more on it. You can also use the backside if you want, but you're going to need to do an active job search and to be active networking. I highly recommend you get business cards. Develop a one-page bio. It could even be a half a page. It doesn't have to follow resume format. It doesn't have to be chronological, but just a one-page bio that says, okay, this is who I am. This is my brand or my tagline. This is my target. These are my most important marketable skills. And on the same page down at the bottom, or maybe on the backside, if it's a one-pager, here's my target list that I'm currently interested in. So this is the kind of thing that you use in a meeting, perhaps an informational interview, perhaps a coffee meeting, when you're sitting across the desk from somebody. And it's one thing to say, well, I'm looking for a VP of HR role in Southern California in manufacturing or tech. Let me know if you hear something. And even though the person might be more than willing and interested in helping you out, if they're not in your space or they're not looking too, the likelihood that they're going to run into something like that or hear about something like that is pretty darn slim, number one. And number two, with the passage of time, that memory fades, and 3 months from now, they won't remember. Okay. If, on the other hand, you present them with a target list and say, here are the 5 or 10 companies that I'm most interested in. Do you know anyone in those 5 or 10 target companies? And if so, can you make an introduction? Okay. That's much more effective and much better enables the person who is willing to help you be of value to you. So another reason why the target list is so important. The elevator pitch, 30 seconds or less. Here's my name. Here's what I'm good at. Here are my marketable skills. Here's what I'm looking at. So I'm at Johnson. I'm a VP of HR, manufacturing and high tech, looking for a global CHRO role, any place in Southern California. My target companies are X, Y, and Z. It's a 15-second kind of roll off the tip of your tongue kind of thing. So when you get asked, or you meet somebody at church or at a party or some other networking event and so forth, and they say, well, what do you do? So you should be able to answer that question in about 15 seconds. And very, very succinctly with respect to who you are, what you're looking to do. Okay. And then your LinkedIn profile. Again, you can spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, but your LinkedIn is your primary collateral marketing tool. So it's important to have your LinkedIn profile fully complete and robust. Also, with respect to LinkedIn in particular, LinkedIn is not simply your online resume. Think of LinkedIn, like I said, as your number one piece of marketing collateral. So up at the top, for example, right underneath your name, rather than including just your job title, include a marketing statement. I'm an employee relations guru and whatever. And by the way, you don't have to use real terms. You can use guru or wizard or expert or whatever you want, but think of it as your tagline. Think of it as your branding statement. So you can include that on your LinkedIn profile. I also recommend a picture, professional picture. Not everybody does, but I think that the majority do. And like I said, we could talk a lot more about LinkedIn profile, but the point I want to make is it's a really key tool and worth you spending some time. One final little piece about LinkedIn. If your profile is not fully developed and you want to spend a fair amount of time, go into the settings and toggle off the notification switch. And the reason for that is if you're working on this on again, off again, on again, off again, on again, off again for the next 2-3 weeks or whatever it is, every time you make a change to your profile, it sends out a blast to all the people that you're connected with. It says, okay, Phil just upgraded his profile. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to be the boy who cried wolf. You don't want to turn that back on, toggle that switch back on until you've got that profile fully formed to your satisfaction. Then toggle it back on, and then it'll blast out an update list to all your connections. Okay, so those are all within the tools place. So where do you do this? Tiffany mentioned 2 or 3 of them. Professional associations like PIRA and SHRM are great places to network. And by the way, there's no substitute for pressing the flesh and meeting people face to face, not just virtually or not just online. So to the extent that HRMA or PIRA or some of these other groups, and there's a whole slew of them within the HR community, for ATD, for example, used to be ASTD, American Society for Training and Development. There's locally here, there's OCAVA, Orange County Comp and Benefits Association, that's affiliated with World at Work. So depending upon whether you're a comp person or employee relations person, whatever, there's probably a special interest group or subset for you to network with. Conferences like the PIRA conference, like the SHRM conference. Some of those specialty groups have conferences as well. And so you're not only networking with other members of that association, but lots of times with vendors. Case in point, in the local comp and benefits arena, since most organizations outsource the benefits to the broker community, those people locally have extraordinarily broad networks and great places to network in. So if you're actively in a job search and you can reach out to your benefits broker confidentially, just say, hey, I'm looking for a new opportunity. They hear about a lot of things that never get posted. So it's another great source. Industry groups. So if you're in manufacturing or in electronics or healthcare, whatever, there are lots of industry verticals, not functional verticals, but industry verticals. Are great places to network. They too have conferences and seminars and symposia and so forth. So it's a place to meet folks. And then alumni associations, not the least of which is USC, in addition to wherever you did your undergraduate work. So SC has an extraordinarily large and robust alumni network. So these are all places where you should be spending time and cultivating relationships and meeting new people. Okay, now, coming back to LinkedIn for a minute, how do you build your network? Here's a technique that I learned from Terry Goldfarb, who used to be with Resources Global. She now does this kind of pro bono on her own. So get a large sheet of paper. You can do this on a worksheet, Excel worksheet, and identify in that first column your current role, and then your most recent one before that, and the most recent one before that, and so forth. There's nothing critical about the sequence. It just enables you on a company by company or employer by employer basis, identify those people who you worked with who should now be candidates for your expanding your network, and particularly within LinkedIn. So in my columns here, and again, the sequence isn't important, list the managers, list your coworkers, list your subordinates, list producers or suppliers, customers, friends, classmates, faculty. You can add other categories, people that you know from church, people you know from your kids' soccer league. It doesn't matter how it is that you know them. The first step in this process is to populate that sheet with names. Okay, so I listed Joe Jones, Soon Kim, Jose Garcia, Pradeep Patel. Those are just names that I just plugged in there with respect to, okay, those were the managers that I worked for in that current and prior one and prior two companies. Okay, so this is another sheet, by the way, that you can pick up, put down, pick up, put down, pick up, put down. And the purpose of this exercise is to identify people in your broad network. Some of these folks you've known for years and years and years. Some of them you know really well. Some of them you know personally. Some of them are arm's length professional acquaintances. Some of these folks you barely know, and you hardly knew them when you worked with them and haven't maintained any contact since. That's okay. Put them all down. Like I said, you want this as a very large, kind of at the top of the funnel, as many names as you can possibly think of. Now, once you have that pretty well populated, what you want to do with this list is you want to go through and you want to segment it into A's and B's and C's. The A's are people who know you really well, okay, and or they're in a position of power or influence or visibility that would be really, really valuable in your network, okay? So at the top of the list would be the president of the company that you work for, who knows you really well, can speak really well of you, tell great stories about you, and has a really broad professional network from which he can make introductions and referrals. So that's kind of at the top of the pyramid. So B's are people who you know less well, people who are maybe middle managers, aren't as influential, maybe not as far along in their career, maybe not as broadly networked. And then C's would be people with whom that you know, but you maybe barely know them or barely an acquaintance, or they may be too junior in their organization to be particularly well connected. And so this is not to cast judgment on any of these people. So A's and B's and C's. This is only relative to the power or the leverage that they have with your network. So with the A's, those are the folks that you want to reach out to on a much more personal and a much more frequent basis. So it may be a phone call, it may be a cup of coffee or something like that, once a quarter or once every 6 months. Okay, those are the people that when you move into an active job search, those are the people that you want to reach out to first. Okay, and on a most personal level. So the B's, it might be just something, an email broadcast, and maybe you update them every quarter or something that says, well, here I'm in my job search, attaches my one pager with my bio, and more specifically my target list, if you know people in those companies. And the C's are the folks that you might reach out to much more infrequently, and again with less material attached. Okay, so it's a way to not only identify candidates, but then segment that, just like you'd learn in a marketing segmentation class. Segment that so that you can identify those people who would be most valuable to you, and then you develop a strategy that says how, in what way, and how often do I reach out to them. Okay. So we talked about elevator pitch, 15 seconds to a minute. You should have 3 or 4 versions. The shorter ones usually are better. For those of you who don't know, the term comes from, so you walk into an elevator and you're at a conference or somebody, and somebody holds out their hand and introduces himself and says, hi, I'm Ed Johnson, who are you and what do you do? You should be able to answer that question succinctly within about 10 or 15 seconds. So that's where the time that it would take to go up a couple of floors in an elevator. And the target list is something you should have with you all the time. So as you meet somebody, and if you think that they could be valuable to them, you can hand them a target list and say, okay, this is my target list of companies. Who do you know in those companies, and that you could perhaps introduce me to? Okay, a targeted resume. So all of you probably have a generic kind of all-purpose resume that has your career on it. Much more effective, particularly if you're responding to a posted position, is to have a resume that's customized to that position. And in a job posting, much like job descriptions, typically are tiered such that the most important aspects of the job are the top 3 or 4 positions listed. So you can target your resume, modify your resume such that it is most responsive to that list of tasks on the job spec or on the job description. So to the extent it takes more time, clearly, but it's a much more effective route than just broadcasting the spray and pray shotgun approach of just kind of a generic all-purpose resume. And better yet, with the resume, whether it's generic or whether it's specifically targeted, instead of listing duties, tasks, and responsibilities, try and express those things in terms of outcomes, in terms of results, in terms of accomplishments. So not just that I was responsible for recruiting for my plant, but I hired 52 production workers in a span of a year with an average time to fill of 28 days and at an average cost to hire of $1,200 per hire or something of that sort. So that's an outcome statement. That's an accomplishment statement, not a task, not a responsibility. So to the extent that you can express them in outcomes, and to the extent that you can quantify, again, you've got a much more powerful, much more compelling resume than just the kind of generic one that I see so often. Okay. Moving on to LinkedIn. Recruiters, both in-house recruiters as well as external recruiters, and this is whether they're contingency or retained, LinkedIn is their very first place that they would look. Aside from their own Rolodex, I know that's a dated term, but aside from their own personal network. And the good ones, the good recruiters, the ones who are knowledgeable and skilled at this, know how to do the Boolean searches within LinkedIn to find source folks that would be good candidates, which is just another reason why it's so important for you to have a robust, fully populated LinkedIn profile, number one. And number two, someplace in that profile, especially when you click on where it says contact info, if you're a first choice, make certain that you have a cell phone and an email address. So even if you create a separate email account just in Yahoo or Hotmail or some other one that says, Susan.Smith at hotmail.com or whatever, and maybe you're only going to use that exclusively for job search. But the point is that you want to not only be easily found on LinkedIn with respect to skills, but once someone finds you, whether they're internal or external, that it's easy for them to then reach out to you. So you've got your contact information so that if they want to reach out to you, they don't have to kind of go around the horn and send a LinkedIn in mail. Okay. So, and again, with a picture. So expanding your invitation to connect, there's a button when you see somebody on the screen, and one of the defaults is to send a connection. I recommend that you, instead of using the default, take the 10 or 15 seconds to customize the note. Hi, Philip. We met at the conference last week. Great to get acquainted. Would be delighted if you would accept my invitation to join your network. Sincerely, Ed. Whatever. Something short and sweet. But rather than the default, I'd be pleased to join your network, or it is the default language that LinkedIn is using these days. Okay, so there are a number of positions still on LinkedIn that are posted on LinkedIn, as well as the LinkedIn groups. So you can join up to 50 groups on LinkedIn. This is another great resource. So identify groups that are within your industry vertical, within your functional vertical, whatever. So if you're looking for Hispanic engineers, for example, just to pull one up, put that in the search bar in the groups, and there's probably 20 or 30 of those organizations. Some are open, some are closed. So the open ones, anybody can join. You just click the thing and you're automatically a member. The closed ones, there's some moderator that looks at your background and skills and said, yeah, they qualify and that they would join that group. And you can leave those groups if they're not servicing you well. But it's a great place not only to network, but you will see in many cases positions advertised in those LinkedIn group feeds that you won't see anywhere else. They're exclusive to that source. So yet another reason to be in there. So cross-linking job posting, company search, and LinkedIn. So you see a posting for a position that you think that looks like a fit. You might want to apply through the front door, through the online application process, but you also want to be looking on LinkedIn to say, well, who do I know in that company? And so you look in that company and say, oh, Michelle's in that company. I'm going to reach out to Michelle and say, Michelle, do you know the hiring manager? Would you be willing to hand carry my resume to that hiring manager so that you can get at least eyeballs on it where it might not make it through the screening, through the sourcing and talent acquisition folks. So just a quick example of how you kind of triangulate those things. Okay. So how do I get there? The job boards, niche specialty boards, there's a number of these things that are specific to again, not just LinkedIn groups, but there are a number of boards that are specific to an area. So World at Work, for example, the formerly American Compensation Association has job postings. SHRM has job postings, et cetera. Recruiters, there are contingency recruiters, retained search recruiters. The Kennedy version, so-called Red Book, is a listing of thousands and thousands of recruiters. And the recruiters have the ability to indicate functional specialty, industry specialty, or just generalist. So if you're looking for recruiters that specialize in HR or specialize in healthcare or specialize for HR and healthcare. There are those agencies out there, but you're going to have to find them through a resource like the Red Book, the Kennedy's online, and then reach out to them and saying, okay, I'm interested in pursuing an HR role in healthcare, and here's my resume, et cetera. Contingency retained, the earlier you are in your career, you will probably use more contingency than retained. Retained search typically is director and VP levels. Most retained firms would do a minimum of 100K, and a lot of them won't do anything below 150K or something. So those are typically more reserved for more executive level positions. But earlier in your career, the contingency folks, the management recruiters and so forth, others should be on your list. And then an awful lot of organizations are using increasingly this temp to hire, or used to be called temp to perm. That's no longer advised in California because of the perm label. But there's an awful lot of these firms, temporary help firms, that place people in organizations that want to try before you buy, or it might be for a short-lived assignment, an interim assignment while somebody's on a leave, or they just have a project. But these are not only opportunities for you to get your foot in the door, but oftentimes if you perform well, they'll say, you know, the companies will find a way to keep you. So yet another avenue. Okay. All right. Okay. I got this one and then one more slide, so I'm actually going to be able to squeeze this in on time. With respect to information interviews, this is a great technique, particularly if you're really early in a career, particularly if you're not working in HR and you want to find out about a company, or you want to find out, well, what does a total rewards director do? What's a day in the life of a total rewards director? Okay. So you can identify folks, you know, through LinkedIn or Reference USA or other references. And to the extent that you can find somebody that you know that can tee up a warm introduction, and then you call this person up or you send them an email and it says, hi, Maria, I'm a graduate student just completing my degree program in HR at USC. I'm interested in your company, or I'm interested in your particular role. Would you be willing to spend 20, 30 minutes with you? We can meet at a Starbucks before breakfast, happy to buy you a coffee or whatever it is. And I just want to kind of pick your brain a little bit. I'm doing some research about the role or research about the company. So these are not job interviews. This is information gathering. This is research. This is due diligence. But it's an excellent opportunity for you to find out more about a company, more about a role. And in the context of those interviews, you can also at the close say, gee, this has been really terrific, really helpful. Are there a couple of other people in your professional network or in your company that you think would be good for me to meet or talk to, or to get a different perspective and so forth? So it's also a way that you can expand your network. And to the extent to say, oh yeah, you should talk with Joe, or you should talk with Sally. Gee, that's terrific. Can you give me their contact information, or would you mind teeing up a introduction, and then off you go. So if you get 2 or 3 names from every one of those informational interviews, that list expands pretty quickly. Okay. With respect to job interviews, obviously you've all been through this. You've all been hired. Telephone interviews are increasingly common, particularly in the early screening process. It never fails when you get that call for the interview. It's at the worst possible time when you're standing at the checkout line at Costco, or you just had a significant fight with your significant other, or kids are in the back seat screaming, or whatever it is. If it's not a good time to take the telephone interview, and bear in mind that telephone interview counts. If you do not get through that wicket, you do not pass go and do not collect $200. So only accept the call if you're in a position psychologically and physically and otherwise to be able to respond effectively to that call. If not, just say, can I call you back in 20 minutes, or can we set a mutual time to schedule this call for 2 o'clock tomorrow, or something of that sort? Okay. With respect to the interview process, whether it's a phone interview or the face-to-face interview or Zoom interview, all of you should be familiar with the behavioral interview questions. Tell me about a time when you had to resolve a conflict, or tell me about a time when you had to work with a different coworker, or tell me about a time when you had to solve a particularly difficult situation. And again, the cues will be in the job spec. So you should be prepared and have a ready answer for how am I going to answer those anticipated questions based upon that spec. And then to the extent that you can coach your answers in the PAR format. So problem, action, result. So tell me about a time when you worked with a difficult person. Well, okay, here was the situation. I was working at XYZ company, and Mary Smith was my coworker who had been there for a long, long time. We really had incompatible styles. She was difficult to work with. Here's what I did to resolve that problem. And as a result of that, we were able to develop a much more effective working relationships, and our productivity for both her job and my job went up 20% as a result. Okay, again, that's a PAR answer configuration to an interview question. Okay, and lastly, home stretch here. Here are 3 people that I follow. There are others. Alan Collins was a VP of HR at PepsiCo. He writes a great column, a newsletter. You can find him at that Success in HR URL. It's free. He also responds to emails. I've chatted with him 2-3 times. I've even chatted with him once over the phone. So it's a great resource for HR. It's HR specific. Another, Liz Ryan, got an interesting background. She is also not only an HR background, but she also leans heavily toward consulting. So if consulting or professional services through one of the comp houses or PwC or one of the others is of your interest, or on your own, that Human Workplace is a great website newsletter. They also have a number of fee programs. So some of the learning and development programs that she offers do have a fee, but it's fairly modest. And she's got a terrific kind of left field view of things. And the last one there is Lou Adler, who is one of my kind of early benefactors. He's forgotten more about employment than the next 20 people I know put together. So I follow him pretty regularly. He also has a free newsletter, blog, email, whatever you want. So there are 3 folks that I follow and that I recommend. So I actually got through that in 45 minutes. Tiffany, I'm pleasantly surprised at myself. So happy to entertain questions, or if not, then if we don't have time for that, then somebody wants to email me or text me or whatever, I'm happy to follow up with them separately. Hope that was helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Professor Johnson.
You're welcome.
Does anyone have any questions? You can go ahead and unmute, or you can put them in the chat and I can read them off.
Looks like Michelle does.
Oh, I was just expressing gratitude through my little emoji. So no question.
Oh, okay. All right. By the way, and most of what I touched on is kind of generic. The one thing that I probably should have addressed in the slide, if you're in a marketing job now, and your bachelor's degree is in history or something like that, it's really hard to break into your first HR job. And one of the added tasks that I should have put on, I'll make a note to change the slides. Think about ways that you can express what you've been doing in HR terms. So if you've been working in customer service, okay, think about examples in customer service that could apply easily to employee relations kinds of roles, for instance. Okay, if you've been working in finance, okay, think about ways that you can transfer those skills to budgeting or comp analysis or data analytics or other kinds of roles within HR. So you might have to twist them a little bit, but think about ways, because your task is to convince some employer that says, well, all right, I have a bachelor's degree in some other subject. My work experience is not in HR. All I have in my favor is this newly minted MS HRM from USC, which is fabulous, but I don't have any experience to go with it. So think about ways to express the value of your current experience and whatever else that is you've been doing in a way that would make you valuable in an HR role.
So we do have 2 questions in chat. I'll read the first one out for our recording.
Okay.
The first one is from Delaney. She asks, do you have any tips on changing functions? For example, recruiting to benefits, etc. I'm currently finding it difficult to transition to HR generalists from recruiting.
Okay. It's almost always easier to do it within the firm that you're in rather than changing roles and changing firms. So the first suggestion is, see what opportunities, what possibilities might exist within your current employer organization. And the advantage you have is, you know, the organization, you know, the culture, you know who the people are, you know what the structure is. Okay. And that's something you're going to have to learn brand new if you go to a different company. So it's easier to make that transition from within than going to a new company. Now, if on the other hand, you either that's, you know, foreclosed or not available to you, or you want to look out, then it's a little bit of a, I don't want to say trial and error, but it's more difficult. And again, you're going to have to figure out a way to take what you've been doing so far and parlay it and express it in terms that are more specific or more oriented toward the job in which you want to head. Okay. Sometimes it's easier to do in a small company. So if you want to go from, you've been working in talent acquisition, you want to go into a generalist role. Sometimes it's easier to find a small to medium-sized company that maybe has an HR shop of 4 or 5 folks that you're doing recruiting as part of a generalist role, supporting some portion of the business. So that gives you, allows you to use your expertise in recruiting, but allows you to expand into employee relations and some other kind of stuff in support of a business unit. So that's another way to do it.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Tina. She asks, how can you gauge salary ranges for graduates?
That's a tough one unless you've got access to specific salary data. So some of that you can find anecdotally from salary.com and pay.com and so forth. But that data is somewhat anecdotal, and because compensation is specific not only to the role, but the geography and the industry. So you could take an HR role in pharma versus oil and gas versus retail versus healthcare, even within the same geography, let's say the greater Los Angeles area, and they're going to pay significantly different. Okay. So it's hard to find a number. You know, you're probably going to find a range. Glassdoor has some another source that you can find some of that out, but it's difficult to ferret out that data. And another good way is, if you have friends or colleagues or classmates that you know are in that role, ask them. If you don't mind me asking, you know, Diana, what do you make in your role? Or Chelsea, what do you make in your role? You know, and folks are usually pretty free with that. I don't speak for anybody else, but that's another way. It's just like I said, ask your friends and colleagues who are in that role. Hey, what do you think is a going rate for what you do here in this market and in this industry?
Does anyone have any other questions? Either they want to unmute or in the chat.
You're welcome.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. If anyone wants to hang out afterwards, that's totally okay. See if I can stop the
Okay. And I'm happy to stick around if it